Los Angeles, California. Summer of 1972. The private boxing gym, hidden behind an unmarked door in the hills above Hollywood, was a sanctuary for the elite, a place where champions trained away from prying eyes and celebrities. Learned to throw punches without paparazzi documenting their failures. The walls were lined with faded photographs of boxing legends, their eyes seeming to follow anyone who dared enter this hallowed space. The smell of leather, sweat, and liniment hung permanently in the air, a perfume of combat that had seeped into every surface over decades of brutal training sessions. On this particular evening, the gym had been transformed for a charity event that brought together the worlds of sports and entertainment. Crystal glasses clinked against the backdrop of speed bags and heavy leather punching bags. Men in expensive suits stood beside athletes in warm-up gear. Actresses in designer dresses laughed with trainers whose knuckles bore the permanent calluses of a lifetime spent teaching violence, but all of that faded into insignificance when George Foreman entered the room at 6 feet 3 inches and 220 pounds of solid, fight-hardened muscle. Foreman did not walk into spaces. He conquered them. The Olympic gold medalist from Mexico City, 1968, had just extended his professional record to a perfect 40 wins, with every single victory coming by knockout. 40 men had stepped into the ring with George Foreman. 40 men had been carried out unconscious, defeated, destroyed. His right hand was considered the most devastating weapon in boxing, a sledgehammer wrapped in leather that had ended careers and shattered dreams with single, apocalyptic blows. The crowd parted before him like water before a battleship. Even other professional athletes, men who had achieved greatness in their own domains, instinctively stepped aside. There was something primal about Foreman's presence, something that triggered ancient survival instincts in everyone who encountered him. His eyes, deep set beneath a heavy brow, scanned the room with the calm assessment of a creditor who had never encountered a genuine threat. His entourage followed close behind, trainers, sparring partners, handlers who managed every aspect of the champion's public life. They laughed too loudly at comments Foreman had not made yet, agreed with opinions he had not expressed. Such was the gravity of being in the orbit of the most dangerous heavyweight on the planet. If you want to, discover what happened when the most devastating puncher in boxing invited the fastest martial artist alive into his domain, and learn the lesson that would humble a champion who had never known defeat. Stay until the end of this story. You will not regret it. Foreman had been holding court near the main ring for nearly an hour, accepting congratulations for his latest victory and entertaining guests with stories of opponents who had crumbled before his power. His voice carried the confidence of a man who had never experienced failure, never felt the canvas against his back, never known what it meant to be outclassed. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, he became aware that attention was flowing away from him. In a corner of the gym, a smaller gathering had formed around a man who looked almost comically out of place in this temple of heavyweight boxing. Bruce Lee stood among curious onlookers, demonstrating techniques that drew gasps and murmurs of amazement. At 5 feet 7 inches and 140 pounds, he appeared fragile compared to the massive athletes filling the room. His simple black clothing contrasted sharply with the expensive suits and athletic gear worn by others. Yet, people could not look away from him. Foreman watched as a former NFL linebacker, a man who outweighed Bruce by nearly 100 pounds, attempted to grab him during some kind of demonstration and found himself grasping empty air. He watched as Bruce's hands moved in blurs that seemed to defy human capability. He watched as hardened athletes shook their heads in disbelief at what they were witnessing. And George Foreman, who had never shared a spotlight in his life, felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, not fear. George Foreman did not experience fear, but curiosity, mixed with the competitive fire that had driven him to Olympic gold and professional perfection. "Who is that?" he asked one of his trainers, nodding toward the gathering. "Bruce Lee does kung fu. Been in some TV shows. They say he is fast. Foreman repeated the word with a slight smile. He had faced fast opponents before. Fast opponents fell just as hard as slow ones when his right hand connected. "Let us go meet this kung fu man." The crowd parted as Foreman approached, and the murmurs around Bruce fell silent. Everyone sensed the shift in atmosphere, the collision of two very different kinds of power about to occur. Bruce turned smoothly, his dark eyes finding Foreman's with no trace of intimidation. The size difference was almost absurd. Foreman towered over Bruce like a grizzly bear facing a panther. His fists, even relaxed at his sides, looked like they could crush stones. 80 pounds separated them. 80 pounds of muscle and bone that had been the deciding factor in 40 professional boxing matches. "You are that kung fu guy from TV," Foreman said, his deep voice carrying easily through the NAI gym. "Bruce Lee, right? Lot of fancy moves you got there." Bruce inclined his head respectfully. "And you are George Foreman, the Olympic champion. 40 victories, 40 knockouts. Your reputation precedes you." "Damn right it does." Foreman's smile widened. But there was an edge to it. The smile of a predator sizing up potential prey. "I have been watching you do your demonstrations. Real pretty stuff. But I've got a question for you. Please dot all that kung fu, the spinning, the fancy kicks, the movie stuff. What happens when someone like me gets hold of you?" Foreman raised his massive fists, displaying weapons that had hospitalized men far larger than Bruce Lee. "What happens when you cannot dance around and you have got to take a real punch?" The crowd held its collective breath. Several people exchanged nervous glances. This was George Foreman, the most feared puncher in the world, publicly challenging a martial arts instructor. The outcome seemed predetermined by simple physics. Bruce's expression remained serene. "An interesting question. What answer would satisfy you?" Foreman gestured toward the boxing ring that dominated the center of the gym. The canvas was still stained with the sweat and blood of countless training sessions. "Why do you not step in there with me? Show me what all that stuff can do against a real fighter." In a real ring, a murmur of alarm rippled through the crowd. Several people moved as if to intervene, but stopped. Who would dare tell George Foreman what to do? The invitation was tantamount to a death sentence. Professional heavyweights had been destroyed by Foreman's power. A 140-pound martial artist would not survive a single clean blow. "You want me to enter the ring with you?" Bruce asked calmly. "Unless you are afraid." Foreman's smile took on a harder edge. "I will take it easy on you. Just want to see if any of that fancy stuff works when the pressure is real." Bruce was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving Foreman's. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well, I accept." The next few minutes passed in a blur of preparation. Word spread through the charity event like wildfire, and soon nearly everyone present had gathered around the ring. Foreman climbed through the ropes with the easy familiarity of a man who had spent thousands of hours in this environment. This was his kingdom, his domain. Here, size and power made the rules. Bruce removed his shoes and climbed into the ring with quiet grace. The contrast was stark. Foreman, in his boxing shorts and gloves, bouncing on his toes with barely contained violence. Bruce, in his simple black clothing, standing still with hands relaxed at his sides. "You sure about this, little man?" Foreman asked, touching his gloves together. "Last chance to back out." "I am sure," Bruce replied. "But perhaps you should remove the gloves. They will only slow you down." Several people gasped. Foreman's bare fists were even more dangerous than his gloved ones. The suggestion seemed suicidal, but something in Bruce's tone, some absolute certainty, made Foreman pause. "You want these off?" He laughed, but there was uncertainty beneath it. "Your funeral." He pulled off the gloves and tossed them aside. His bare knuckles were calloused, scarred from years of training and competition. Hands that had ended 40 professional fights. Hands that had never failed him. "Whenever you are ready," Bruce said simply. Foreman attacked. His jab, the fastest punch in his arsenal, shot toward Bruce's face with speed that had caught every opponent he had ever faced. Professional boxers with world-class suit reflexes had failed to avoid this punch. It hit nothing. Bruce had shifted perhaps 2 inches to the side, but it was enough. Foreman's fist passed through empty space where Bruce's head had been a fraction of a second before. The champion's eyes widened slightly, but he recovered instantly, throwing his legendary right hand. The punch that had knocked out 40 men, with all the devastating power his 220 pounds could generate. The punch cut through. Bruce had flowed around it like smoke, like water, like something that was not entirely physical. He had not retreated, had not jumped away. He was simply no longer where the punch arrived. Foreman unleashed a combination. Left hook, right uppercut, left jab, overhand right. For punches thrown at full professional speed, any one of which could have ended a fight. Each one failed to connect. Each one found only emptiness where Bruce Lee had been standing. The champion stopped, breathing harder than he should have been after such brief exertion. Confusion clouded his features. In 40 professional fights, spanning hundreds of rounds, no opponent had ever made him look like this. No opponent had ever made him miss so completely, so utterly did stand still and fight. Foreman growled, frustration breaking through his composure. In a real fight, Bruce replied calmly, "No one stands still. They move, they adapt, they survive." Foreman attacked again, this time with everything he had. He pressed forward, cutting off the ring, using his size and reach to trap Bruce against the ropes. Every technique he had learned, every strategy that had made him champion, he employed them all with the desperate intensity of a man whose worldview was crumbling. Nothing worked. Bruce flowed around punches, slipped between combinations, existed always in the spaces where Foreman's fists were not. He never retreated to the ropes, never got trapped in corners. He moved with an economy that made Foreman's attacks look wasteful, clumsy, predictable. After 2 minutes that felt like hours, Foreman stopped. His chest heaved. Sweat poured down his face. He had thrown more punches in this brief exchange than in many of his professional fights, and had not landed a single one. He breathed, the word barely audible. "Your power is immense," Bruce said, not even slightly winded. "Perhaps the greatest I have ever witnessed. But power means nothing if it cannot find its target. You have trained to fight men who fight like you, who stand in front of you and exchange blows. I do not fight like anyone." Foreman shook his head slowly. "No one has ever." "Now let me show you something." Before Foreman could react, Bruce moved. There was no preparation, no telegraph, nothing to indicate what was about to happen. One instant, Bruce stood 3 feet away. The next instant, he was inside Foreman's guard, completely past the champion's massive arms. Foreman felt a light touch at his throat, Bruce's fingers hovering a centimeter from his windpipe. Before he could respond, another touch at his temple, then his solar plexus, then the inside of his knee, for targets, for potential fight-ending strikes, delivered so quickly that Foreman's nervous system could not even begin to formulate a defense. Bruce stepped back smoothly. Returning to his original distance, the gymnasium was absolutely silent. 50 people stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what they had witnessed. George Foreman, the undefeated destroyer, the most feared puncher in boxing, the man who had knocked out every opponent he had ever faced, had just been completely helpless against someone 80 pounds lighter. Foreman stood motionless in the center of the ring. His hands, those legendary weapons that had ended so many fights, hung useless at his sides. For the first time in his career, he understood what his opponents felt. The helplessness, the confusion, the realization that nothing they knew could save them. "If those had been real strikes," Foreman said slowly, his voice hollow, "the fight would have been over before it began," Bruce confirmed. "Your power is not in question, Mr. Foreman. You are perhaps the strongest puncher I have ever encountered. But strength without adaptability is a limited tool. You have spent years perfecting your ability to destroy, but have you spent any time perfecting your ability to adapt?" Foreman was quiet for a long time. The crowd waited, uncertain how the champion would respond to such a public demonstration of his limitations. Some expected anger, perhaps even violence. George Foreman was not known for accepting criticism gracefully. But when Foreman finally spoke, his voice carried something unexpected, genuine humility. "I have spent my whole life being the biggest, the strongest, the hardest puncher in any room," he said slowly. "Everyone I have ever fought, I have destroyed with pure power. Trainers, opponents, experts, they all told me that power was everything, that if I could hit hard enough, nothing else mattered." He looked at Bruce with new eyes. Not the dismissive gaze of a champion humoring a lesser athlete, but the searching look of a student encountering an unexpected teacher. "You just showed me that everything I believed was wrong, or at least incomplete." Bruce's expression softened. "Not wrong. Your power is real and valuable. 40 men can testify to its effectiveness. But you have relied on one tool, because that tool has always been sufficient. What happens when you face someone against whom that tool is useless? I lose, or you adapt. You learn, you grow." Bruce extended his hand. The greatest champions are not those who never face adversity. They are those who evolve when adversity reveals their limitations. Foreman stared at the offered hand for a moment. Then, slowly, he grasped it, not with the crushing grip he used to intimidate opponents, but with genuine respect. "I need to understand what just happened," Foreman said. "I need to understand how you move like that, how you see things before they happen. Can you teach me?" "I can show you principles," Bruce replied, "but teaching requires time, dedication, the willingness to empty your cup of everything you think you know. Are you prepared for that?" Foreman smiled, a genuine smile, free of the arrogance that had characterized his earlier demeanor. "For the first time in my career, I feel like a beginner, and honestly, it is a relief. I did not know how heavy that undefeated record was until just now." The crowd began to murmur, then to applaud. They had come expecting to see George Foreman dominate another challenger. Instead, they had witnessed something far more valuable. They had seen a champion discover humility, and in that humility, find a new path to growth. In the months that followed, George Foreman would seek out training in disciplines beyond boxing. He would study movement, timing, the principles of combat that transcended any single style. His trainers noticed changes, subtle improvements in his footwork, a new awareness of angles and positioning, a willingness to consider strategies beyond simple destruction. Years later, after Bruce Lee's tragic passing in 1973, Foreman would speak of that evening with reverence that time never diminished. "I was undefeated when I met Bruce Lee." Foreman would tell interviewers, his voice carrying the weight of decades of reflection. 40 knockouts. Everyone was afraid of me. I thought I knew everything about fighting. Then this man, 80 pounds lighter than me, made me look like I had never been in a ring before. When asked what lesson he took from the encounter, Foreman's answer never varied. "Power is not everything. I spent years believing that if I could just hit hard enough, I could beat anyone. Bruce showed me that the man you cannot hit is more dangerous than the man who hits hard. He taught me that real fighting is not about destruction. It is about adaptation. That lesson made me a better boxer, and more importantly, a better man." The encounter between Bruce Lee and George Foreman became one of the legendary untold stories of 1970s combat sports. A moment when the most powerful puncher of his generation discovered that there were dimensions of fighting he had never imagined. It demonstrated that size and strength, while valuable, were not the ultimate determinants of combat effectiveness, and it proved that true champions were those willing to learn, even when learning meant admitting that everything they believed was just the beginning. If this story inspired you to stay humble and keep learning no matter how successful you become, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that true strength includes the strength to admit your limitations. Leave a comment telling us about a time when you discovered that what you knew was only the starting point. We will see you in the next video with more incredible stories from the world of martial arts.